Good morning, everybody. This is Matthew Fleming of Advantage Business Systems. I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager for the Microsoft Dynamics GP part of the business. I am accompanied today by one of our senior consultants, a gentleman called Stephen Royal. Stephen is kind enough today to have been dragged in from working on site, which is what he does predominantly. So he's out there at the sharp end, if you like, working with clients, experiencing the sort of issues that you're coming across. But what Stephen's going to do for us today is he is going to run a integration workshop. We will record the workshop and we'll put the workshop up on our YouTube channel later on today, hopefully, in the next couple of days at least. So if any of your colleagues would like to see it subsequently, they can view the workshop there. Just so that you know, you are all in mute mode. We currently have, I think it's about 7 or 8 attendees, and it does get a little bit chaotic if all 7 or 8 people try to ask questions at the same time. On your tab, your GoToWebinar tab, you should have a questions button. If you have questions, I will be monitoring the questions as we go along. I'll try not to interrupt the flow too much or too often, but I will make Stephen aware of any questions as and when they come up. Thanks for attending our webinar, and I'll hand over to Stephen. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, everybody. So as Matt was explaining, the purpose of this workshop is to talk about integration. And in order to do that, we're going to cover a number of different options that will exist for you, depending on what your requirements are. So for the purposes of the webinar this morning, I will be using GP 2015. And I am using the 2015 versions of any other products that we'll be going through today. So we're going to start by taking a look at the concept of if you don't have an integration tool, but you need to import data into GP, what options would be available to you? And if we start, the most basic form of data coming in would be to use a macro to do that. So first of all, I'm going to go through and show the mechanism of how you would create a macro to import data into the system. And for the purpose of this example, I'm going to use the creditor card, where we want to be able to enter the bank details for a range of suppliers. So that would be a kind of typical example of where people need to import data across a lot of records without doing it manually. But bearing in mind, this is without having an integration tool that will do that for you. So the way that we would go about this is to just click save. Is we would first of all have to record a macro for entering the information for one record. And that would be done by going to Tools, Macro, and then Record. Okay, we can then give a basic name to this file, and then we will be entering the information manually. So if I go in here and enter my first record, if we're entering bank details, we would then need to enter the creditor ID, then we would need to go to the remit to address, then we would click the EFT bank, then we would change this to the region that we want, so UK, then this will be the bank's name, West, and then we have a bank account number which needs to be formatted to 8 characters, and then we would go to the bank code and we would type in the sort code, not putting any dashes in. Then we click OK, we click Save, we close the window, and then we click Save here. At that point, we've completed the task for one individual record. So now I can stop the recording. And because I'm going to use this example when I run the new macro, I'm just going to quickly delete the entry that we just put in there. There we go. So once we've recorded the macro for one record, I'm now going to browse to the location of where I've saved my macro. And my macro was here. So if I just open this in Notepad, there is the code that we recorded when we saved the one record. So we can see here is where we typed in the creditor's ID, here is the bank name, here is the account number, and here is the sort code, choosing item number 3, which is UK. So for this kind of process, it's only going to work if we're merging the correct fields for any variables. So for example, if they're not all UK, we're entering some against US or another European country, you would need to have made sure that we saved that value. So now that we've got our initial macro, we would then need to locate an Excel file that's got our data. And where will I put it? Can't see it now. Oh, it's in the macro. Here we are. There we go. Okay. This was a sample file that I created a little bit earlier. So in this case, my file will contain the creditor ID, the name of the bank, the account number, and the sort code. So this will be my source data. So if I close that. So now, in order to create our proper macro, I'm going to open this in Notepad. I'm going to select everything on that sheet, choose copy, and then I'm going to open Word, and I'm going to paste the macro for the one record in there. Once I've done that, I can then choose to go to Mailings, Start Mail Merge, Letters. Then I want to select the list of values that I require, so select recipients from an existing list, browse to the location of where we saved the file, which is in here, creditor bank details, and in this case it was sheet 1. If I choose edit recipient list, I can see the records and I can filter these out if I don't need everything. But if I'm happy with the source data, I then need to start merging the fields. So in here, I go between the quotation mark and I would insert the creditor. And I look for the next field, which is the bank, and I would insert the bank name. And then the same thing for the sort code, sorry, the account number, and then lastly the sort code. So now that I've merged those or entered the merge fields in there, I click Finish and Merge, and then Edit Individual Documents and merge them all. And you'll see at the top it's saying letter 1. So now I can see that it's merged the values in my first record, and then it should go on to the second one, which is like so. Then I do File, Save As, choose the location of where I want to save the document, and then I change it from a Word document to plain text. Then I can give it a unique name, import bank details, and click Save. And it presents me with a conversion screen, which I normally tick Allow Character Substitution, and then click OK. And therefore we've now changed, it now says import bank details.txt, which I can then close. I don't need this to open any further, and I can close the original macro. There is the file that we've created that has now got our multiple records. And all I have to do now is change this by rename to change the file extension to a .mac, like so. So that is my mail merge macro. And if I then go back to GP 2015, ensuring that my cursor is in here, I can then go Tools, Macro, and Play, and then browse for the macro which I've just created, which is there. Click Open, and away it goes. And there's our 2 records that it did in 4 seconds. So that method is relatively easy to set up, it's easy to create, and it's easy to execute, but the proviso there is all of the conditions have to be met. So for example, if your source file contained a creditor record that was, let's say, on hold, then the macro will then fail at that point because it doesn't know what to do with the checkbox which says it's on hold. If there was an address misspelling, so the address didn't exist, it would fall over. If the creditor ID that's contained in the macro doesn't exist because it contained an apostrophe or something of that nature, again the macro is likely to fail. So if it does fail, then the way to deal with that is to locate, it will tell you which record it's failed on, then you open the macro in Notepad and then you do a edit find, you look for the record where it fell over, and then you can remove all the entries prior to that. And then run the macro again. So it's a very good way of getting data in a relatively quick space of time, providing all of the conditions in the macro are met. So that's our start point for having no tools available at our disposal. But that's not a practical method when we're dealing with transaction entry, because it would take probably a lot longer to create the necessary macro. And it would probably be faster to type it in. So based on that fact, the next option that we have is the option to be able to push data from sources such as Microsoft Excel. And this would be suitable for any client that only has a very limited requirement for certain transaction entry that they want to import and wouldn't want to go to the expense of having a proper integration tool. So we at Advantage, which some of you that have attended our customer events may have seen, we have put together some Excel templates that enable data to be imported into the system. So this one is one that is dealing with a general ledger journal, but in this case we're also mapping it to include analytical accounting. Again, it will support any number of dimensions that you may have set up if you use analytical accounting. And if I just delete that description, in order to allow you to validate the data, when you enter the account number in, so if I just take this out, I've got a drop-down list here. Every time I select that account, it automatically populates the account description. Now, I'm not storing that information. I do have the accounts in here, but this is executing a SQL query that when you select the account number and you tab from that field, it will automatically retrieve the account description from the account master table. Therefore, should you type something or paste something in which contains an invalid reference, it will show you which line contains the error. So that's quite useful from that respect. The only configuration work that we have with such devices is we enter the name of our SQL server. And once we've entered our SQL server, this is using Windows authentication in order to make the connections to the database. So it doesn't require the use of a GP license. It doesn't require the user to be logged into GP. But it does require them to have the DIN group permissions assigned within the SQL server under their Windows name. So once you've changed the name of the server, you would right-click, refresh the list of companies which will make the connections, and then from the drop-down list you can then pick the company that you wish to import the journal into. The next journal number will automatically be created from the system, and then we have a batch ID which we can enter information that will deal with standard or reversing journals. We enter the transaction date. We can enter the currency and enter an exchange rate if we wish to override the GP default offering. And then we've got our reference. And you can see that on each one we have a comment that tells you how many characters is the maximum. And this is geared in order to trim any field that you enter more than the number of characters. It will trim that to only put in the maximum it can allow. If you're using the standard intercompany module with Microsoft, then this spreadsheet will also support that. So you would tick the box for intercompany, which then enables the company ID field. We can also enter our distribution references here. So if I say this is line 1 and this is line 2, and then when we enter our debits and credits, you'll see it populates a total in the top. So if I just temporarily take that out, it tells me there is a difference, and when I put the right value in, it comes back to 0. This particular mechanism is useful where probably the maximum number of lines that you're looking to import would be probably no more than around about 300. What I have noticed at certain sites is that when you exceed a number, let's say it's 305, I've seen some timeout issues occur. The timeout issue is a limitation or a restriction, if you like, within a stored procedure. In this case, this particular spreadsheet is calling the standard eConnect stored procedures. So if you're going to import large journals that would contain, say, 500-600 lines, then this would probably not work for you, and we would need to think about using something else. But for routine journals of less than 300 lines, no problem. Once you've entered the information in here and you're good to go, this is the company we're pushing the data to, and then when I click import, if all goes well, it should import the transaction into GP. So it tells me it's processing, and then it's told me that the journal number is 3472. So if we go back to GP 2015 and go to transactions and financial, I'll change this to number 2. There we go. There is the journal which we've just imported. If I expand, we can see there's the distribution reference that came through, the reference, the date, the batch ID has been created, and on this line, if I hit the expansion to show me the AA information, we can see that it's populated the staff and the project to these 2 codes here. So that's looking at an Excel import for entering journals. We can also consider those for using with accounts payable transactions, that's payables invoices or credit notes. We can also look at that mechanism for receivable transactions, but in that particular format it wouldn't be particularly well suited towards sales order processing should you need to import the distribution accounts.
Yeah, I've just got a question pop up, Simon. What is the best way to import transactions to a miscellaneous log in project accounting? Would you like to come back to that? Or?
I could answer that. In terms of importing transactions into project accounting, probably the best tool to use for that would be something called SmartConnect, or possibly a development tool called Scribe. It would be feasible to be able to import the miscellaneous logs using an Excel import sheet, but that would require development. So we don't have that sort of ready to go, but the theory would be sound, because you would have a header record for the miscellaneous log, and then you'd have the line detail that would go in for each day or each week. Okay,
thank you.
In addition to this kind of approach here, sometimes people would want to import things like exchange rates. If you're maintaining daily exchange rates across a reasonable number of currencies, you may want the ability to be able to push the exchange rates directly into GP from a sheet such as this. As you will probably know, the exchange rates are stored within the Dynamics database, which is a system database, and therefore we would need to have a stored procedure created, which obviously we've done before, which needs to be executed against the Dynamics database, and then we're calling that stored procedure in the background. So when we talk about stored procedures and how we would do custom integrations, the easiest way for me to demonstrate that would be to take a look at something we've got here, which is one of our customers was using the Nolan's intercompany module, and they needed to import general ledger journals, but with the intercompany element. So if I just open this, this is where we created the stored procedure for doing that, which is identifying the fields within the table that need to be updated. And as you can see, we specified some default values. it's important to note that when you create a custom stored procedure, that where you have values where there is no default and it's using sort of a blank string, okay, it needs to have these two quotation marks to interpret that we're not trying to pass a pure null. Without these two items in here, the import will assume that a value has to be passed. But by putting the quotation marks in this way, it identifies that we're not trying to pass a null, we're just passing an empty string. So these all come from, these fields of information will come directly from the table. And then further down, we then have the information relating to what we're trying to do. So we're inserting into the NCIC table these fields with the values that are coming from the spreadsheet, and then it will have some error handling in there in case there is a problem. So this is merely doing an insert statement, because we wouldn't have any updating taking place here, because on a journal with Nolan's Intercompany, you're marking the box to say that it is an IC transaction, which then would normally open another window where you would populate the values into the intercompany section, which in this particular case is in the table which we called NCIC 3006. So there is no limit or restriction on creating custom stored procedures and calling those within an Excel template. So that's one option that we've got there, and we obviously have lots of clients using different variations of that type of approach. And obviously, if anyone is interested in further information regarding their individual requirement, obviously Matthew, your account manager, will be the person to approach in the first instance. Moving on from an Excel import sheet, we would then move into our old favourite, which is Integration Manager. So under my GP 2015, Integration Manager is still in existence for our clients on GP 2015, and most of us will be familiar with this tool either now or from some point in the past. And as you will probably know, this tool is what we call a macro tool. So when you run an integration using Integration Manager, you will see that it minimizes your GP instance. The integration runs, and on completion it will then bring your GP interface back onto the screen. So Integration Manager is really importing data as though you were keying it in. So it's following all of the logic which GP will request when you're importing. So as an example, if you imagine that you had default distribution accounts applying to your SOP transactions or your POP transactions, when those defaults exist, when you manually enter the transaction and you tab from those fields, it then automatically defaults the information in. So anything which the system would normally do when you manually enter the transaction is exactly the same approach that Integration Manager would make. As you will probably know, and I'm just looking at the samples here, this particular tool gives you the ability to import into Dynamics GP only. There is no direct mechanism with Integration Manager to be able to push data to something else, and the integration points are based on the core adapters which are installed. So when we look at the tools menu and we look at the object browser, okay, we've got our destination adapters, which are usually into two sections. You've got Dynamics GP. So if I expand that, we then see each of the modules that are supported. So if we're looking at sales order processing, it will allow you to import a sales transaction. If we look at receivables, we can import cash receipts, receivable transaction and customers, etc., etc. But these are the integration points that are available. When we look at the eConnect adapter, the eConnect adapter includes some other options, but if we were to look at sales order processing, for example, it's still only the sales transaction. And the main difference with using the eConnect adapter with Integration Manager is it will give you some control over whether or not you are going to enforce all of the normal validation rules that would apply. So when we're using this particular tool, it's pushing the data to the eConnect stored procedure, which A, makes it faster, and because you've got the option of turning off some of the validation, that can be a big time saver. But again, we are stuck with what we see. So the only difference we saw this time round is on the eConnect adapter we have one for project accounting, but as you can see we can only import timesheets or employee expenses. It doesn't give us the ability to import a miscellaneous log transaction, it doesn't give us the option of setting up a project, and we can't run any other processes through that interface. So a useful tool that's been around a long time, but it has severe limitations. Does it support analytical accounting? Not out of the box. If you want to import journals with analytical accounting, you would need to have a customization made to the integration, which would normally use VB code. And I know that many of you out there will have integrations that use such codes. Again, importing bank details into the system is not there as standard. So there are limitations with this tool. But as we move into a more connected system, more and more clients are now having requirements to connect not only to the GP data, but they also need to connect other systems. So it may be that you're using a front office billing system, and you need to import transactions from that billing system into your back office accounting, and therefore you're not going to be able to do that readily with Integration Manager. You're going to need a more sophisticated tool. In addition to that, sometimes you'll need multiple systems to be updated in one go. We also have more and more software being made available in cloud format. So when we're dealing with a cloud application, there are other complexities as to how you would connect to that. And we start to bring in things like, are we going to use web services? Do we have data which is being inputted via a website which we need to capture and then bring into our back office system? So we need to have a completely different approach when it comes to these items. So I'm not going to spend any more time really talking about Integration Manager. I think most people will be familiar with A, its limitations, and B, what it does, and the fact that it's a macro tool. So I'm just going to exit from there. And then we would move into a more sophisticated tool, one of which is a product called SmartConnect. And SmartConnect is a nice front-end user interface that is calling all of the eConnect stored procedures. Okay. One of the things that when you're coming to consider an integration, whether you use this tool or you'll use another one, or you're having some custom development to perform your integration, is how do we know the values that have to be passed and what they are? So probably the best solution I can suggest for you to consider is if we just go to a web page and I go to Google, and in any browser, if we're looking for eConnect schema reference, the number one hit is from Microsoft, and this is giving you all of the existing integration points and the field information. So once we look at this page, we can then choose the module that we want to look at. So going back to the question that was asked earlier, can we import a miscellaneous log transaction into project accounting? If we go to project, we then have, these are what we call nodes. So we have different types, of one of which is miscellaneous log expense. And then for here we have a header record and we have a line record. So on the header, when I double click that node, it shows me the fields that need to be populated with the data types and the values that would need to be passed. So for the transaction type, you need to pass a 1 or a 2. So we can see that there are string fields here, what the lengths are, and it also indicates whether or not they are required. So this is a good source of information relating to how an integration needs to be approached. So if we just go back and then looked at the line information, again we've got some of the fields are replicated again, and then it tells us the type of field and the value that needs to be pushed through. So that's a good place to go for looking at the schema to understand the table structures for the import that you're considering. So Moving on to look at SmartConnect. When we go to the setup screen for SmartConnect, we are presented with a number of options. So out of the box, this product is going to support anything that you have in GP based on those existing eConnect nodes that we just took a look at. And you can then create your custom nodes if you want to import something that isn't there as a standard eConnect stored procedure, as we saw with the Nolan's Intercompany Journal example or the exchange rates. So within our GP connector, we then select our version. So the good aspect of this product, which is from E1 Solutions, is that it isn't version necessarily specific. So this version of the product would work with 2015 or 2013 or 2010. It doesn't, it won't support GP10 in this version. You have to be on a slightly older one for that. But this product first came out to work with GP9 and has continued to go from strength to strength. This points to the server. This picks up our Dynamics database name. So if we're not using the word Dynamics, we're changing it. It will happily accept that. We then have our connection parameters, and then we have the default company that we want to import to. So that's a standard GP integration setup. Then we've got the ability of being able to connect to Microsoft CRM. It doesn't really matter whether you're using CRM 2011 or you're on the more recent version, which I think is 2013. And it doesn't matter whether you're using the cloud version or you've got on-premise. But within the setup for CRM, you would be putting in the necessary credentials and the URL that you need to go to in order to make the connection to the CRM data. In addition to that, it will also fully support Salesforce integration. And again, that's a cloud-based application. So I can just show an example here. This is something that I'm working on for one of our customers at the moment. It has a Salesforce URL which goes in here. We have some user credentials, and then we have the option of using real-time data sources. So for either Microsoft CRM or for Salesforce, it needs to be able to have external access to smartconnect.svc, which is a separate website. So if I just click on my one, it just brings up a web page like so. So that web page needs to be visible to Salesforce. So we can connect to GP, we can connect to Salesforce, we can connect to Microsoft CRM. We also have a web service connector, and we also have a generic connector. In addition to that, when you're running real-time integrations which aren't being monitored by a member of the team, error handling is all important. We need to have notification to an administrator every time one of our real-time integrations may not function correctly. So therefore we need to set up email, which is just one setup page to put in the name of your SMTP server. And then we also have a web service, and again there's another website that is running in the background for the SmartConnect web service, and the parameters for that get put in here. I didn't bother to set this up. And then we've got some options about how we interpret dates. So once we've made a setup of the connectors that we wish to use and we've registered those, we're pretty much good to go. So from a system perspective, if I just choose something here, so if I'm looking at GP data, okay, so when we come into here, the first thing we choose is a data source type. So this gives us three options: a bulk data load, which is, if you like, a one-off. I want to import this information once. We can have real-time events, which would be when we're connecting to other systems such as CRM or Salesforce or something else. That would be a real-time event, which is based on triggers. And then we have the option also for changes. So it could be that if a master record, for instance, was being held in GP and it gets changed, that acts as a trigger to go and update another system, or vice versa. So we need to choose our option here. Then we have our data source, and the standard data sources in here would be, it could be an extender data source, It could be a Dynamics GP query. It can come from any version of Office from 2003 onwards. It could be a multi-data source, so it could be I'm using multiple text files as an example, or we can use standard ODBC or OLADB, or we've got our Salesforce query. We can use smart lists as our source data if we were looking to push data from GP to something else. Instead of having the flat file, we just call the smart list favorite, and we use that. So one of the benefits of this tool is, and most of you will be familiar, the smart list application, which exists in all versions of GP, was written by this company, which is E1 Solutions. So they have SmartConnect, they have Extender, which allows you to build applications, they have Smart List Builder, they have Smart List, amongst some other products. So this is all interconnected. So this is why we can pull data into Extender windows, we can pull data from Smart Lists and push that data to another application. It'll also support standard text file, XML, and queries. Okay. Once we've selected our source file, we will then go into our destinations. So for our destinations, we can choose a number of different types. So it could be that we want to export the data to a file. It could be that I want to test my import by importing it not into GP, but to go to a GP file where it will show me the information that it's trying to pass through to the system, bypassing the validation, which would cause the import to fail. So as an example, if the account number that you were trying to import into didn't exist in GP, the import fails, as you would expect it to. But if you're not sure which one, you may want to choose to run the import to a GP file, which means it will show you the values that it's attempted to pass. So that's very useful in terms of troubleshooting integrations when they're not working as you expect. We can also use a stored procedure as a destination, or we can have a SQL table, or we can have a destination to Salesforce. Okay. CRM is not an option there because I haven't set up the connector for CRM. So that's a sort of brief outline of how this works. If we were looking at a Salesforce integration as an example, just to show that this functions, if I said import customers from Salesforce, so on my data source type, I'm going to choose bulk data load. Data source will be a Salesforce query, which takes me to the Salesforce object query language. I would then go modify, which makes the connections to Salesforce in the cloud. It then shows me the available objects that exist, and I can build my query on a drag and drop basis. So if I bring over the account table, I can choose to pick specific fields, or I could choose to pick them all. So if I just go all to save some time, and then go to query, there's my syntax that is there. If I go to data, if it's valid syntax, it will then show me the data that exists, as we can see here. So that's making a connection to a Salesforce object, and again we can just join these tables together in very similar ways to the way that we would join SQL tables in GP. If we want to edit the text, we would just choose Edit SQL, and then from here we could then put in our where statements, okay, in the normal sort of way. Just pick whatever field that you want. You can then choose the key fields and the number of preview rows that we want to see. So I'm just going to click clear on that. Okay, so having ascertained that, using web services, if that's available to us, then we have the capability of being able to import data from Excel templates. So you'll see in the list I've got here, these ones marked E1 Excel, and there's an AP, a journal, a POP and a SOP transaction. If I go to the folder where these are, which is here, we can see all GP Excel templates, and these are downloadable from the author's website. So if I look at the SOP one, this is the map to import, which I've already done, and then this is the template that we would use. So again, this isn't going to require a user license for GP. This is how the template looks, and then we have a config sheet which is pointing to where our web service is. So if I just change this to my one, like so, and then if I was to click this link, it should take me to the home page for the SmartConnect website, which is there. So we would then enter the database we're importing to, the Dynamics database, the name of our SQL server, we can then put in the user we want to connect with, and then just try to get out of the way. So in here I can type in the SA password, which is not visible, and I can click OK. And then when I go back to my sales entry, because it's got hidden tabs which are pulling data, I've got drop-down lists for the different SOP types. So if I was to pick an invoice, then I can pick which invoice type do I want to use, standard invoice. Then I've got a list of my customers here. Okay, I can change the address information if I want to. Then going to the right hand side, we've got batch, got the date, got to look out for the currencies, you can choose the company, I can enter a PO number, and then I would be into my line information. So in here we can see a list of products, default in the description, and we would enter our units of measure, quantity and unit price. And once we were happy with the template, just drag this out of the way, there is a submit button, we would press the button and it pushes that transaction directly into GP without GP being open. So there's a whole suite of these templates linked to a SmartConnect map that you can use. Then we can create maps independently using flat files. So what I've done here is I've created one a little bit earlier. Something open here. Okay. So from this example here, I've chosen importing a GL journal, which I'm going to just walk you through what we can do here. So for this example here, I want to do two things. One, I need to have it perform some tasks before it starts. So on the header, we have a button that says tasks. And then a little bit like Integration Manager, we've got tasks that would run before the map and tasks that would run if the map fails. Okay, and then in a few moments I'm going to show you how we would put a task if the map succeeds. So when we look at the tasks that would run before the map, I've got two in here. One is some code for creating a batch ID. So instead of having that hard-coded on the map or it's included within the source file, I want it to open a dialog box to ask me to input the batch ID that I wish to use. So we have these scripts, and again most of these scripts are available directly as a download from the software author. I just go to my integration folder, KB scripts. These are all the standard ones that you can go and download. So there's one here for dealing with batches. Okay, so you don't need to necessarily understand the code. It gives full directions on where you have to place the code and what it does. There's also one here which is called Select Destination Company Template. So sometimes you may have an Excel sheet that is to go across multiple companies. but you don't want to be running the integrations as you would with Integration Manager by logging into one company, run it in there, and then log into another one. We want to push this data across multiple companies in one go. You can do that. Also gives us the ability to be able to transform data before the data is passed. So anytime you put code in anywhere within SmartConnect, you need to click the validate button to make sure that the syntax contains no errors and it's valid. So that's one task that we've got there. And then another one is to demonstrate error handling. So we're going to import something and I'm going to cause it to throw an error so we can see how that functions at the same time. So in this case I've got a task which is going to capture the current date and time, and that has to run before the map. And then going to when the map fails, I've added some code that is going to read from the event viewer, and we have two types of event logs that are maintained on the server. One is the SmartConnect version and the other one is the eConnect. By and large they're going to give you very similar information, but usually the SmartConnect one contains a bit more easy to read data than the one from eConnect. So that's going to read the event log, and then the next task is that we would then want it to email that information to a specified individual. So here is my mail system where I'm going to send it from me to me so that we can see it. So those are on there. Then if my map was to succeed, in this example I want to do something slightly different. So I've created two folders here, one called imported and one called to import. So I want to place my sample file, which is here, into the to import folder. And again, I could be doing this by company. So I'm just opening the sample file to show you. So I've got date, reference, currency, two account numbers. Actually, I'm just going to change this because of the time constraints. Debit and credit. Okay, I've just modified that sample file slightly. I was going to demonstrate how we would use the one column, but I probably won't have enough time to do that. So I've moved my file into there. So on my map, what I want to do is I want to be able to move the file. So if the map succeeds, move the file and add, say, a date and timestamp to it. And that way I'm moving my import files through the system on an automated basis. So going back to our main header record here, it's a bulk data load using, in my case, Excel 2010. I'm going to change the path of the file to where I've just moved it. So to import, and there's the file. And then within this workbook, I'm picking sheet 1, but it will show me any other available sheets. And my key field is reference here. If I do a preview, I can see there are 2 lines on that transaction. Into the nodes, we're going to create the journal and we're going to add distributions. But I just want to go back to the tasks and say that if the map succeeds, when I click on add new task, it gives me a number of options, one of which is move file. So in move file, we're going to say move source, just give it a name. So on failure quit, on success go to next step. And then there's an option here of overwrite file or append date and time. I'm choosing that option. Then it says move file from to the folder that I've created where I want to place it, which is imported. Like so. So that's all I need to do. And click save. and then that task is enabled. So that's automating that process, and you can see I've got a marker next to the task that run if map succeeds. Moving into create journal, I've created a calculated field for the batch, okay, which I just need to show that. So that's just returning the global from address, which was the variable I set up on the before map runs, and then I've mapped that over. Then the journal number, I need that to be generated from the system, so I'll quickly go to a GP rolling column, call this next journal number or something like that, choose the series, which is financial, choose the company, which is Fabricam, choose the document type, which is a journal number, and I mark the box used for global variable. If you're using SOP as an example, when you choose this option, you'll be choosing the document type and the document ID for that company. So that piece of code there will automatically give me the next journal number. Then the reference field is in my source file. The transaction date is also in my source file. I've got a drop-down list for the transaction type being regular or reversing, and then I don't need to necessarily fill any other fields in. In this case, the key field is reference, and I'm grouping on that field, which when I do a preview shows me one line. It's one journal header. Then we go into the add distribution, where this time it will be grouped, but on the field called line, which should then show me two lines, which it does, 1 and 2. And then here we've got some options of the batch number is going to come from here. I can use the next journal number rolling column for the number. I've got the credit, the debit. I can then pass either the account index or the full string, which has gone in there. If I'm dealing with VAT entries, I would fill these two fields in here. And that's really all we would need to do. If I've got a distribution reference, drag that to the description field, and then that's all it is required. So there's a mapping I've done there. The company is selected as being TWO. I could choose a different one, and then I'm good to go. I would hit run. Here's the box asking me for the batch ID, test GL, and it says it's worked. And if I then go to the folder, in my to import there is nothing, and in my imported I have the file that we've just imported with the date and timestamp added to it. Copy. I'm just going to put this back into the to imported and rename it back to its original state. And now I'm just going to edit the file to create an error. So I'm going to an extra 0 on that line there. We go back to GP, so demonstrate that the transaction did successfully come in, which is there. Okay, with our distribution references, and that's all fine. So we're just going to perform the same thing again. Call the map back up. And this time when I hit run, it should generate an error. And it's come up saying the account number string does not exist in the account index. And you'll see that an email has popped into my inbox telling me which account number contains the incorrect error. So that one there with the 4 is shown the fields that it tried to pass. So if you were running this in the background as a real-time integration without anyone monitoring it, this is the kind of email that that person would receive to tell them that there is an issue that they need to fix. Obviously, when you're importing from systems such as CRM or Salesforce, you need to be able to determine whether the problem resides in CRM or Salesforce, or is it passing through that product okay, but it's when it comes to pass the data into GP, is that where the issue occurs? So error handling in both places would be required. But you can see on there, if I go into Fix, unlike our friend Integration Manager, I can come in here and edit the record without going back to the source, and then click Run All. And it should successfully import, and it's copied the file as before. Okay, so within the limited time we had available, that's pretty much a whiz through a number of different options that are available to you. Obviously, if anyone's interested in any of the elements that were shown to you this morning, please don't hesitate to contact either Matt or your account manager, and we'll be happy to engage with you on that basis.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, as Stephen says, if there's anything additional you need, please contact us. We will put up the recording on YouTube. It normally takes a day or two to get there, but it will be up there should you want to share that information. But thanks for attending the webinar. We've got another one this afternoon on budgeting and forecasting, so please feel free to register for that if you want to. But we hope to see you at a future event. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.